your interactive session.
Okay, perfect. Now we are recording in progress at 2:30 exactly, so we're going to get started. I'm so excited there's a guest in the audience that will announce here soon enough. I just found out, so this is spectacular. And again, there's pins and stickers floating around. Some people came in late. The pin has that image on it here, which is Comics and Justice for All. That's the name of the session that we've got here. I initially built this as a 15-minute like thing, so the middle section there on AI art, what, how, and some assistive tools is about 15 minutes, and then we're kind of putting some scaffolding around this because I think there's some really interesting things that we should talk about, and I'm really excited about. And that is that we're going to talk about comics. What are they? And also why? Like, why are we talking about comics here at a law and technology conference? And when, you know, it's not really obvious when you start, but I think by the end it'll be obvious, and hopefully we'll have some converts on that. Then we've got sources, critiques, and techniques. Oh, and I realized what's interesting here is this is 4:3 aspect ratio, and these are all in Comic Sans typography, but it didn't show up because they don't have it there, so I think I'm saving you from some of that. So what are comics, right? So comics, if you go by the definition that Will Eisner has, Will Eisner's a pretty well-known illustrator. He works together with Jack Kirby and a lot of the other people that kind of went on to found Marvel and DC and stuff like that. And his conception of it, or his description of it, was that it's sequential art, right? That's literally all that it is. So what we have here is a sort of, you know, highly kind of abstracted view of something that either is, you know, a black and white version of two Target logos, or it's two eyes. But this is not yet a comic, but we can make this into a comic by adding a couple of panels and then adding a sequence, right? We've got a story there, right? There's something going on. We can all recognize this sort of universal view of what eyes look like, right? So we think, oh, it's there. We're looking down, we're looking up, to the left, etc. And then we can like take that and make it slightly more interesting, slightly deeper narrative here by making then this sequential art such that, I mean, we now have faces, right? We now have this universal design of very simple forms, very simple lines that are starting to tell stories, right? We might think, I'm scared, something smells bad, or whatever. We have like this kind of set of things here. So what Will Eisner says is that it's sequential art, and others have kind of adopted that. And there's variations on this that you can see, but I think that's the simplest way to conceive of it. Right? What I like to do in this is actually incorporate into it, because the whole thing of sort of the premise of where I started with this was using AI tools to generate art for the storytelling aspects of it. So whenever possible, I like to sort of reiterate things to take that from there. So this is a panel made in Midjourney. This is an empty street scene in Philadelphia. I haven't been around Philly enough to know exactly where this is, but you know, the prompt with that made that look like a street scene. That's not a comic yet. Insert somebody on a bicycle. Still not a comic yet, right? But let's make a sequence out of this, right? In fact, let's make it that the person isn't just driving them. They're flying. Now we have a story. Now this is like, is this a Miyazaki story where he's like flying off into like the castle in the sky or something like that? Or what's going on, right? So these are Midjourney images, and I think this is a real focus of what I think that we should be trying to do, and I think there's a real value of creating for ourselves, for our students, for access to justice, and a bunch of other things. So this is sequential art, and this is what comics are. The question then is, okay, can a single panel be a comic? What's the most sort of widely known single panel comic anybody can name? Like
Far Side.
Far Side. Okay, second most widely known, highly family friendly, anything like that? Family Circus, exactly, right? I was gonna go with, I'd sort of picked one or the other, so went with Family Circus. So the question then is, I'm not gonna probe you on this, but like then is this a comic? All right. If we say the definition is sequential art, so we use art forms to tell motion and stories and development of a narrative and things like that, is this comics? Probably still, but I mean, that's a question of what that is, right? And then if you turn it into a meme, it's this comic as well, right? There's a lot of really, really lowbrow family circus things like that.
That's Neutral Milk Hotel.
Yeah. So you listen to entry-level hipster garbage? Exactly. I'm glad you noticed that. I was like, I think somebody's going to get this. So this is good, right?
Roger.
Okay. So single panel comic like that, right? I think so. I think we can still call it that, but we still are sort of starting from the idea of sequential narrative. This here is an example of something, and again, the font doesn't show up on that. Should have loaded those in advance. So I did a test case that I've submitted to the Library of Congress, Copyright Office specifically, Copyright 101. So this is illustrated definitions of like 98% of the definitions of the copyright statute, right? So this is one of them. Carl helped me a lot with this one. This is a one-panel comic, right? So Franklin Computer, this is the definition for literary work. In the back of this, we see the actual full text of literary work that I stole from the Legal Information Institute and just cited US code for that one. So this is, Franklin was getting sued by Apple, and their claim was, well, computer code, or specifically, computer code was not a literary work. Well, the court case actually says that it was, and says source code as well as object code is, so it's sort of embedded in all of this here, and my sort of additional authorship into it was that, and that we then think, is this a comic? Well, it's telling a story, it's connecting to law, and it's creating something visually interesting that's a lot more compelling than just the language of the statute, which is kind of boring, right? But so we lean into this to try to do a little bit more storytelling for that. Anybody want to guess what this is supposed to represent? Librarians in the audience, what's that?
Hornbook.
Hornbook, exactly, right. So get out your phones. Hopefully it works with this aspect ratio here. You can scan in this thing here. It's also, just as a tip, attached on the panel page for the Kali Drupal website, right? So you can go there and you can see attachments to it. Anybody pull this up? Did this work?
Yep.
Okay, cool, right. So this is an A to Z list of examples of things from legal research. A colleague of mine, Alex Hutchings, and I had a good time sort of preparing for this, and we wanted to do like, what if we did a real simple comic that used these techniques to try to tell a story? Again, it's a question of, is an A to Z list like this a story, or single panel depictions like that a story or not? We can debate, but I think this is like an example of something that you might use to try to better visually explain things, right? And so that's the same QR code just there. I just wanted to give a shout out to Kali as well. So Kali, as you all know, also a comic book. Theirs are also a similar nature where it's a single panel thing. One of them is what color is your CFR? And the other one is, let's see, Images of the Law. Anybody remember what the title of this one is? I think it's called Images of the Law, right? So there's other ones that are out there that you can do that are colored like this. So I just sort of another examples of sort of sequential art as comics and how they show up in the law and what they look like. And you can browse through the A to Z thing there. Take it all you want. That thing is free to use, and email me if you have any questions about that for that. Right, so that's the what. Right. Now the question is why. So why do I think that comics are a really interesting and important thing to think about and incorporate into legal education? Well, I think that potentially the deal is that they're very relatable, right? People can relate to them. We've got visual storytelling, and there might just be a good chance that it enhances access to justice. I think it can and it should. But at least it enhances understanding, and it's storytelling and it's visual narrative that makes you interested to look at things and to learn things. So this is a tech audience here. So in 2008, okay, this is the other reason I'm doing it. I forgot this slide was in here. I'm doing a test course called Comics in the Law. So the guy on the left there teaches a class on visual arts integration in other subject areas. He's never done a law class. That's the comic version of me in the middle. This is our book arts person on the left, right, sorry, who's going to help us with the class. We're going to teach a class that's a reading class where the goal is read comics and make an access to justice comic. So sort of the framing of why I'm doing all this stuff here. We're going to test it out in the fall. see what happens. We also have a book art studio, so we have a risograph and some cool stuff that we're going to actually print cool things. So back to the story here. 2008, the Google Chrome browser was launched, or at least an update to it was launched, and what they wanted to do was tell the story of what this was and send it to the press and get people to talk about it. Get people to know about like threaded messaging and overhead of multiple tabs running JavaScript and why page performance would be different and why it was all that kind of stuff. Well, what they did is they got this really smart guy, really good illustrator and storyteller, Scott McCloud, to make a comic out of it. Anybody remember this one when it came out, right? This was awesome, wasn't it? And you read it and you're like, well, I never thought I'd really like technology as much as I do, or at least I didn't think that I would be interested to read about, how developers write APIs that are asynchronous and think about like what that was like in a sort of an enjoyable way, right? So this is Scott McCloud. I mean, you saw this when it came out? Do you remember this? Yeah. This is pretty cool, right? Sent it, and it was actually just printed and sent to all these journalists, and everybody talked about it. Everybody learned things from it. So that's Scott McCloud. Another example here, I'll pass this around, just the book here, so you can take a look. We've got a little bit of time left here. This guy, Will Eisner, put together something, it's like service journalism. It's a little bit like, the YouTube how-to videos of today. For 20 years, he had a contract. He kept winning, and he had to keep rebiding it. For 20 years, he had a contract with the U.S. Army, where what he would do is publish these things, and look at those nails there. It's crazy, right? He would publish these things, and this next thing here shows us 2 panels of it. These were comic books that were oriented around how to do daily things that they found that servicemen and women were not doing, right? So this one is an example of like how to responsibly swap out parts in your various supplies and equipment and things like that. And some of them were like how to understand the technical manual from the department of such and things like that. And they would have these characters that always made bad decisions. And so the idea was like, show the bad decisions so we'll understand the good decisions. There's a question here of whether it was propaganda, because for 20 years he was writing for the Army. I think probably not, or at least it wasn't as much propaganda as some of the things, if you ever are interested in a deeper dive, there's this book, Pulp Empire, which I highly recommend, Secret History of Comic Book Imperialism. Like this is true sort of exploration of what that looked like, where we were sort of like trying to subversively put stuff out there. This was trying to put things in the hands of people that would then learn from visual storytelling and make good decisions that were responsible around things, right? So this is storytelling, and this is, I think, a pretty fascinating look into it. Sadly, the things that he had, there's some good reprints of it. Virginia Commonwealth University actually has a digitized collection of most of these. The originals were sent to a warehouse to be stored, and they received them and threw them away.
Oh.
Yeah, so they've digitized many of them, they've recovered some things like that. I don't think anybody has a complete run. That book is actually pretty good because they've been able to curate a lot of them. They just threw them away, right? So it's kind of interesting and sad. And then in the law, and you probably have seen, especially the 2 on the right here, they're updated a little bit. In the law, we actually have full-length comics that tell really interesting stories. I assume most of people here have heard of Bound by Law. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a great exploration of fair use in filmmaking. Then the other one that's there, Theft: A History of Music, is going to be republished in color. So they're actually recolorizing it. I think they're updating some of the content there. They're both available as Creative Commons licensed comics, and they've been translated into multiple languages, and people use them in film classes and things like that, all places around the world. Things like that. So they're really fascinating. The one on the left, have you met Kanan Drew? Okay. So she's this woman who works in The Hague. And what she has done, I think she's done 2 so far, and she's a contract to do a couple more. She's doing a story of the Indian Constitution, Indian Constitution, basically styled for kids so they can better understand fundamental rights. Pretty cool, isn't it? Right? So that's the thing that's going on there, right? Okay, so that's the what, and that's the sort of what's going on in the law. The other thing, like, is, well, why do I think cartoon images are superior to other things that we might do, right? Other visuals. Well, if we were to use things, and this comes a little bit, I'm cribbing from, Scott McCloud has this great book on understanding comics, so some of this is kind of cribbed from his recommendations. If we have things like this, where they're actual photographs, whether they're old, historic ones, I think this is Jack Kerouac signing something, it's the annotation page in the A to Z thing. You can see something in there, but you have a harder time, at least Scott argues, of seeing yourself in there, or finding it relatable if it's not really a person that's you sort of feel closer to. So there's a bit of a sort of a better affinity or connection to things if you don't understand or you don't see them sort of as realistic depictions. He draws things very simply, sort of arguing that, hey, we should actually do things where we are even abstracting it even further. So what you're doing is thinking about the narrative and the storytelling, less so than saying like, well, clearly that's from the 50s or 40s or something like that, and look how he had his sleeves rolled up, right? In the middle of this, I think we have, and you can make fairly easily with things like Midjourney, something where you can actually get, I think, pretty good approximations of this to really tell a story. So this is the graphic that I chose in the A to Z thing to depict e-discovery. It's not clear that it's e-discovery, but the combination of somebody looking at it, the connection, the suggestion, you know, you kind of, if not see yourself in it, at least see something I think that's a little bit closer to what you might experience than the photograph on the left. So this is where I think comics are really going to be a superior thing like that. And now this one. So we've got all these examples here on A to J comics. We have this one here. And the author of this, the illustrator for this is Haley, who's right here. Haley or Hallie? Haley, right? Hallie, okay. Hallie, who's right here. Blob?
Blob.
Blob, exactly. The cool thing, do you want to just tell the story of Blob? Because we're breaking the fourth wall, or I can keep going. We'll do that. Okay.
Blob was created to be a highly relatable character to help folks navigating financial distress. So part of a project with the Harvard A to J lab to get folks who are being sued for debt to show up to court and avoid default judgment. That's Blob.
Yep, and there's really cool stuff in there. And the director, Jim Greiner, sent me like all of the original stuff in the colored versions, because the colors of the paper signaled different things, and I tried to match the color of the background of the slide to the actual thing, because I think it shows up in yellow. And basically this is trying to get people to understand their rights and avail themselves of them by finding things that are a little bit more relatable. And at the time they had like, I think that they had a thing where you were to vote on either one, and one of them I think had spots, and it looked a little bit like They Found Me in a Zoo or something like that. Is that right?
That was for a different project.
Oh, that is a different project. Okay, right. But it was Blob or this other one, right? So that's an A to J comic. The other one here, Graphic Advocacy Project, which is also here. So that's what they do. They work on this stuff. Let's get into the Q&A. We'll explore a little bit more about this. So there's really interesting things going on around this that are deep into the access to justice and connection of storytelling for things that I think are really important for us to both look at and think about. Okay, that's the what and the why. We'll now turn into the what and the how. So AI art. So everybody knows and has probably seen like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and all that kind of stuff. These are a little bit later where it's not quite as kind of uncanny valley there. On the far right we have, anybody recognize who this is meant to be? Anybody know?
Joey Florence.
Yeah, it's a sad Joey Tribbiani at a birthday party. Like that was the prompt. The thing is on Midjourney, which we'll see in a second, you log on and you're seeing everybody else's stuff scrolling by. It's all public unless you pay a bunch of money. So somebody had done that and I was like, that's so weird. Why would somebody want that? But I picked it up and now you all get it as well, right? And then the other two are, I think the one on the far left is DeviantArt has a service called DreamUp that uses a variation on Stable Diffusion. It's just a different model. It's nice to see different tools in there. But those are variations on monkey selfies. And if you all have seen and heard the story, it's going back a few years of the monkey who picked up a camera and took a picture and it looks really cool and they submitted it to the Copyright Office. They basically said no, oversimplifying it. They said, no, only humans can be authors. Well, this is then showing that, well, also only humans can be authors and these are AI generated without any editing other than me saying monkey selfie for that. So that's DALL-E and Stable Diffusion. A little bit on sort of what the background is. The LLM, or sort of the underlying language model of Stable Diffusion here, is sort of simplifying some of the narrative here, and please correct me in the Q&A when we get to it, is They have the Lion 5B database that at its heart has 5 billion images that were crawled, and the way that they did it is they crawled them based on either the alt text or a pairing of the image together with descriptions of things. They use the stable diffusion process to abstract what they look like, recombine them, and stuff like that. So we can get more into the technology. This is less about kind of what's going on, but like this is the underlying piece of it, and a lot of the things use the same sources here. And it does contain copyright protected images. We heard from Pablo in the keynote, there's a bit of a mystery around the origins of that. This group is being sued in the Northern District of California together with DeviantArt and Midjourney, and then I think they're also getting sued in Delaware by Getty. So there's some questions around that going on. We can get into some of the protectable things there. So this is Midjourney. Have people worked with Midjourney? Have people seen this before? So a couple people. So this is good. Not everybody. So what I want to do, if it works here, is play something. The way that Midjourney works is it works within Discord or your browser window. This is recorded within Discord. You submit a prompt. You look at stuff. You get it back. You get variations on that, and then you basically iterate around the images that you get. I'm going to play this. There's no sound to it, but I'll try to narrate as to what's going on. It's not quite real time because sometimes the server is slow. And the thing that you'll notice is that you're on a shared server unless you pay a bunch of money. So there's other things that scroll by as we're doing this. So I think, let's see. Yeah, so this is a video. So the first thing you do is you type imagine. You type imagine, and it goes in there and it says, aha, you're trying to create something. All right? Then it says a prompt, right? So there's a prompt there, and I'll read this out. So monkey selfie, comma, realistic, comma, I'm going to spell forest incorrectly, not intentionally. Forest and smiling. I want a happy monkey, right? Right. I want a happy monkey, right? Then you hit go, right? And it ships off there, and all the while, because you're on shared servers, there's different channels that you have. There's multiple rooms that you go into on Discord. If you've used that, I can talk more about the technology there. Things are scrolling. You'll see a bunch of things that are going on that other people happen to be making when I recorded this video a little while ago. Okay? Then it gets to your inbox. You're like, okay, it's there. And it's slowly sort of forming things, because what it's doing is it's taking the idea of pictures of monkeys and kind of combining them to get them together. Eventually, you're going to have a grid of 4 pictures, right? When they're done. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. What you can do from there is upscale. Say, I like that when it's done. Or you can do variations, right? Upscale, variations. Those are the only things you do. I think what I did here was did variations on it. Did some post-editing so we don't have to watch the whole process here. But then you get there, and then this is, with no editing, a monkey selfie created in Midjourney. And Midjourney, and this is version 4, it's not version 5.1. Hands are always bad, eyes are bad, especially if you did early DALL-E kinds of things. You saw that was always really tricky and kind of showed up oddly as you went along. I think I'm then upscaling one, and I'll get there. I think there's about 30 seconds more of this thing here, we'll see. Yep, that's there. Okay, I want that one. You then click on it, save it, you're done. All right, so we did that. The A to Z legal research thing that we did was mostly from this. We used some other tools, Bing and some other engines to do that as well. So we do that, and then there's our monkey selfie. Voila, right click, save image, you're done. Right? So you do that, and like this is sort of the amount of contribution or the amount of effort that it takes to get in there. Okay, let's see. All right, so Midjourney prompting, what goes into it? There are a little bit here on kind of some of the techniques and the elements of what you have to do within Midjourney. So the prompting is like /imagine, everything's imagine, and then you look at to see what it is. And so this is an example. We did something at Richmond that was focused on kind of community building, and it was all in-person, access to justice event, and we wanted sort of imagery to sort of suggest something to people, and we couldn't hire an illustrator, right? We were just like, we need something visually interesting to get in front of people. So we did that, and so this is community planning meeting, town hall. This is just to put some things in there, and this is what we get out of it. These are all square in the sort of normal presentation. So that's what we got there, and it was pretty good, right? And also what we wanted to do is have things that had representation of people of different ages, different cultures. We had different abilities and things like that. So it wasn't just a bunch of white guys, right? So we did some of that. We put those in there. We used the ones that were good. Along the way, we got some ones that were really, really bad, or at least really uncanny. The one on the left was supposed to be sort of thinking Elevating Justice Institute, what it was called. It's like, oh, we're gonna have this elevator to the sky, and it just looks like this sad mall of these people like forlornly walking to like Claire's boutique or something. That does not look happy to me, so that didn't make it the final cut. It just made it to this presentation. And this one too was like kind of cool, but also like, I don't exactly know what's going on. There's like lots of weird sort of noise and things like that. So the cool thing is you iterate, you do stuff, you keep moving on. So that's some of the other prompts that you can do there. Here's sort of some examples of the things that go into it. So you put the prompt in the front, imagine, then you combine things. It's typically what you're doing, what attributes you would add to it, what else you're gonna do to vary it from that. And then at the very end, you add additional elements to this. So by default, it's the current version that you've set, which is version 5.1, or you can change it. There's a settings thing in the next page, but you can do different versions. So the earlier versions had a little bit more sort of like homegrown nature to them. There's also, thinking of the comic book style here, there's a version, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Niji, which is an anime style. They partnered with an anime studio. So this is something actually, it's like expressly created for making cartoons, anime cartoons specifically. So if that's your audience, write things about things that you want them to learn about in that style, right? And then you can do other things like setting the aspect ratio. So if you're laying things out, you wanted a landscape thing in the front, you want squares in the other thing, stuff like that, and some other things that help with that. And the other cool one is this tile one here. If what you want to do is have a big landscape that you then put things in front of that you maybe have drawn or you've taken from other sources, you can use the tile thing and it'll actually stitch things together. So you have one image that you could then span across the entire desktop or an entire landscape without having to sort of tweak it or just stretch a really big image. That's kind of cool. This is what the aspect ratio elements are like. I mean, it's obvious if you've looked at them. You basically, at the end of it, you put two numbers, then it tells what the output is going to be based on what the input regulations or sort of stipulations were on that configuration. The other thing you can do is, and this is really cool, if you have things that you want to use as sort of a source image, upload those images themselves. So one thing we did with the event that we had at our law school was we put pictures of the buildings on campus and pictures of flowers and things. So it was then using that as the training data. It's a little bit like that's your local data and then it incorporates other things into it. These are straight from Midjourney's documentation, but this is if you had things like the Great Wave off Kanagawa or things like this, and you said just combine these two pictures, right? Put them together, and you can like a couple of steps, and you've got a new narrative or a new visual treatment of things that way. These are then all the settings. You just type settings, and you can change them so you can say you're anchoring it to the Niji style, and you're always doing something that what you're doing is developing a narrative around something that is anime cartoons, right? Or you're doing things where you have, faster, slower, etc., some things like that. Those are the settings. The challenge to this, and this example here, this is a little bit like a William S. Burroughs novel. There's no recurring characters in it. It's all sort of stream of consciousness stuff, which is a little bit like the A to Z thing that you all linked to. The challenge is trying to find recurring characters, because what you want to do in a narrative is have a story that follows somebody from panel to panel or page to page. What you have to do is find techniques that you use to create that. You can do that. There's different ways you can do it. There's some videos that I've got linked here and we can see, but what you do is you basically do something where you kind of set it up and you use prompts that then give you things in multiple iterations. And then what you would do is take one of these, extract the bicyclist that you want, remove the background, incorporate that either as a layer in like a Photoshop or a photo editing tool, or you would use that as a prompt that you then upload in Midjourney. So you can kind of use it to create things that way. So this is a great way to get consistent characters, right? And there's numerous videos like this, and there's this whole cottage industry around prompt engineering and stuff, so you can go deep, deep, deep in the rabbit holes. But if all you want to do is figure out how do I get a character that I can use panel to panel, there are some relatively simple ways that you can do it and find some good videos about that on on YouTube. And so for instance, in this one, you might have a story about, she's late for school, or, what do we do, or, things like that. So you could think about, like, what would these little elements do here in terms of making this story or telling things like that. So that's on the creation piece. We're right on time here. Sources, techniques, and critiques. I want to then go into a little bit of, like, what am I doing with this class? What did I use to bring into the sort of, like, coming up with things with this, and then also recognize that there are some very, very serious critiques that I know of, and I'd like to hear from you all as to what you think about them and also what you think of for those critiques as well. So first of all, sources. We're probably for the class going to use this book from Linda Berry called Making Comics. She also did one called Syllabus. Have you read this one? It's awesome. Right?
This is great.
Yeah, and she's great. She's awesome. She's super good. The other one that I found, and this is a lot of sort of building into it, is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. It's really good at understanding, like, what does the narrative structure look like? What are the fundamental features of things that we do to think about storytelling visually, right? Will Eisner's a classic as well. He's got a couple that are similar like that. So we have all of these available. We have a pretty good discipline of these in our undergraduate library. So all the law students taking these will have them on reserve. So these are some of the things that we've got there. For making the comics, we've got exactly one software tool that we're going to recommend. It's called Comic Life 3. It's super old school. It kind of feels like the Printmaker Pro thing where you would like, oh, and here's an example of one of the things that they have from trying to sell us this. They're trying to sell us this by, here's a poster about the Black Death. Look what would happen, right? And this is actually on the K through 12 sales page, so the educational pricing is half of what the sticker price is. And the nice thing is, this isn't a license that you're paying annually. It's $30 or $15 if it's for educational, or $6 if you use the iPad version. Super easy, super nice to lay out, and basically for comic layout and all the comic fonts and things like that, what you want, you don't have to think about design, you have to think about storytelling, right? So this is one of the things that we use. The other thing is that you really need to have is something to do a little bit of post-production editing. You need to do something, so if you're gonna have those recurring characters, how do you remove the background to it? Michael, who's a colleague of mine, he was a big fan of Pixlr. This one's really nice because it works just in the browser, and you have a thing with mostly white background. One click, it's gone, it's transparent. It's free, it's paid for. I was happy to hear, I think it's Nicole from GMU, call up GIMP. We had also sort of like said, wow, GIMP is like whatever, but it's actually pretty good, right? I mean, it's gone through its paces, but it's still existing, right? So if that was your recurring character, what you would do is a couple of clicks and you would make it so you remove that white background so that you could actually see it on something that you could then depict it on that background, that tiled image or things like that you wanted. So we have to have some kind of image editing tools. There's some free ones out there, and Photoshop and things are big too, right? So critiques, all right. AI isn't drawing. We saw what the prompts were, saw how much text went into creating something. I absolutely do not disagree with that. And then we see this here, I did update this after having seen Pablo's talk, it's sort of like the beauty or the benefit of the blank white page, right? Starting from scratch. And Linda Berry, who's the person that we're going to use this book from, she says, how old do you have to be to make a bad drawing? She says, nobody is a bad artist, or everybody can be an artist, right? So there's this thing, and the person that I work with, he's like, we are going to teach people how to draw. Not how to be good artists, but how to simply draw, right? And so I think that there's some value in that, and this is one of the like potential critiques is you're cutting corners, AI is just silly. Well, we're going to try to do this also, right? Not requiring, or requiring the drawing, but the output doesn't have to be that way. So our response is, this is probably, in addition to buying the Linda Berry book, Making Comics, the only other requirement is probably going to be a composition book, or just an empty book and a pen. We'll recommend good drawing pens and things like that. It's really much office supplies, right? We have the fortunate aspect of having also, the fortunate aspect of also having iPads that we can use with our students, and so we're going to get Procreate and a couple of other drawing tools there, so that in addition to drawing by hand, you can also then draw electronically and have things you could easily import into Comic Life. So we've got Comic Life and Procreate that students, if they want, will have an iPad that they can work on. And then halfway through the semester, that was the thing we saw here, everybody's going to be given a copy of this that you can pick up at the, I think it's the Unemployed Philosophers Guild, right? Which is really cool because it's just this thing that's an empty book of where you can take your sketches. And we deliberately do this halfway through the semester because we don't want people to be cabined in by this is how you lay out a comic. It needs to be a 16:9, 2 squares, and whatever. But we want to then say, okay, now start thinking. Now start sketching, doodling, etc. So 64-page. Then they also have these cool things in the back that are, you can make the little speech bubbles like that. If you write to them, they'll give you a discount if you say it's for education, which it is. So we'll do that. The other thing in this critique is copyright violations galore. Anybody know what this picture is here?
AI generative piece that, can't remember what it was the one with the copyright, they tried to do the copyright thing?
Yeah, so this is Stephen Taylor. Anybody heard of Stephen Taylor before? So T-H-A-L-E-R. Stephen Taylor, he, Artificial Inventor is a site that he does. He submitted this Copyright Office saying AI was the artist. It was a work for hire. He hired the computer to do this. He was basically making a sort of philosophical or sort of, sort of policy debate. It's been rejected multiple times. It went up to the, I think so far only the district court, but it's on appeal to the appeals court. Computers cannot get copyright for creating things, okay? Full stop. So he made this argument there. You may have also seen things, Zyra of the Dawn by Chris Kashtanova. So this had been originally issued as a copyright for visual arts. Everybody is celebrating it because look at this person used Midjourney, made a comic book and got copyright protection. The Copyright Office came back and says, wait a second. And so I communicated multiple times with them about this. It's pretty cool. There's some great backstory there that we can chat about. Chris has protection for this in a revised copyright for selection, arrangement, and text. Okay, so it's limited. It's not a visual arts, which is where you put comics. This was the original copyright thing that was out there, but there is some protection to that. And we could also say there's all kinds of questions about derivative rights and did they get permission, is it transformative, et cetera. I'd love to engage in that, if we want to. But that's another sort of really, I think, core critique potentially of looking at the AI tools for creating comics and art. This is some examples. This was from her responsive letter to the Copyright Office saying, this is all of the stuff that I went through to get there. It wasn't, I put some keywords in, I got some images back, and I was done in a couple of hours. The A to Z thing was a little more than a few hours, but it wasn't this level of detail. The quirk to this whole thing is the Copyright Office kind of saying, show your work. Explain more what the human input was. But then there's this whole Feist thing that says actually human labor isn't something that results in copyright protection. So there's a bit of a like, what are we doing? They've got listening sessions around what we're doing with AI across all things there. This is an example of what it looks like for her. The other thing that we see, and this is real, and I did two of these I just did today, and one I'd had sort of in my back pocket from a while ago. AI reveals bias. It's obvious. I put in a prompt that said, CEO, cartoon style. What do we get? Bunch of white guys, right? So what do we get on the far right? I think this was lawyer. What do we get? Pretty similar setup, right? So it reveals bias, or it reveals the fact that we are already biased, and the stuff that we trained it on showed this in the results. What we experienced, having done some of the image creation for the institute that we did at Richmond, is you can get around this, but you have to think creatively about what is the prompt that you put in to get something that gets you different results. Don't rely on just sort of what's there for stock, because you're going to basically perpetuate the stuff that kind of went into it for the training data. The one on the left, I kept trying to do like inventor, 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 and it was all like Thomas Edison, like hovering over. I'm like, oh, please. We eventually, like through enough iterations, I realized there are people that invent things that aren't balding white guys with spectacles, right? Notwithstanding here. Okay. That's all I've got. It's a little bit after 3. So I want you to ask me questions. I'll give you some prompts, and then I'll ask. I have questions for you, and then you ask me questions. Here's what they are. I would love to know what sources am I missing. I've talked to a bunch of people. I want to know who else is doing stuff like this, right? I'm doing this class. I want to continue this conversation. I would also love to know, like, what are your favorite AI tools and techniques? When I wrote the description for this, I thought I would be going a lot more into like, here's the differences of all the engines and stuff like that. We can debate that. I don't have as much on that here. And then I'll just key up the other things here. Third one is, who wants to collaborate me with on a one-page A to J comic? I want to create some sources for my students so that they can have things to look at, and I've got people on deck that will translate them into German and Italian and Spanish. I'm talking 4 panels, right? So email me or we can talk, right? What's your feedback or criticism? What else am I missing? And then AMA, ask me anything. Good. Please.
Surprise, surprise.
Yes, no, please, 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 please.
So I'm obviously a little biased because I make comics about law for a living, but one critique that I think is missing or only partially captured right now is the exploitation of creative labor. Most of these AI engines are drawing from artwork. So especially if you're creating cartoon style artwork, right? So you put in a prompt, you're like, I want this to look like an illustration, I want this to look like artwork. A lot of you might remember the AI generated avatar craze of a few months ago. I think that was Lensa, where all of a sudden all your friends had like a beautiful like rendition portrait of them that looked like it had been made by an artist. And of course, it turned out that that was trained from artwork from artists who did not consent for their art to be used. I don't know a ton about Midjourney, but since you say it includes copyrighted work, I imagine that is similar.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
So I was very excited to see Linda Berry mentioned here. And so given that, I mean, I totally believe what she says that everyone can draw, and I teach law students how to make comics and to draw.
Right.
Why use AI? And as a follow-up to that,
Right.
could you use it, to generate reference images, but still get past all of these critiques by actually having students create the final images? I'm just curious.
Sure, so for 2 responses to that. Why use AI? It's not required, but I want to introduce it. I want to do it for 2 reasons. One, part of what we're engaging with the students on is an appreciation of or a discussion of ownership. So I want them to think about, because what you're going to have to do is create a thing that tells a story and explain what you did to get these content. So there's going to be kind of a requirement of that. I also teach copyright law, so I'm kind of in the weeds on sort of like what's going on in that space, and it's an excuse to like do as well as see, that kind of stuff. The other thing that I'm hoping that we'll get to is, because what we're doing primarily on the creation side in class is drawing, and it's going to be drawing in composition books, use the AI more as a background. Like, I'm going to draw these characters, they're at the bank. We don't have to draw a bank. But you have to draw the character, and you have to think about what it would look like. So I think there's a bit of a like trying to do that, but also a recognition of like, maybe we shouldn't at all, but it exists, and so I want to sort of have it parallel to things. And if there's those people that just can't draw at all, but you can tell the story. But I think you're right, and this is my co-teacher keeps telling me everybody can draw. Like, I'm going to actually draw better as well. So, other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Or feedback. Yeah.
So, Hallie, I got to take the counterpoint for you, if that's okay.
Please.
I'm part of an AI comic book creator group on Facebook.
Sure.
About 50 to 100 comic book creators who are doing AI almost exclusively,
Right.
including Christine Kostova. She's in,
Nice.
in the
Good.
group. So I've been live tweeting your presentation to them. I hope that's okay.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
You can even put out that A to Z thing that I put on the Cali site, and there's another one that's buried in there. There's a bit of an Easter egg you can find as well. Yeah.
Perfect. So my question, one thing I want to bring up, on the other side of the art argument, because I think this is a crucial one for this group, and the group I'm working with, is the fair use argument.
Yeah.
So artists from time immemorial have looked at other art and taken down notes,
Yep.
and then they use those notes to improve their own artwork, right? And if you crack open Stable Diffusion, like when I download Stable Diffusion on my computer, a model, it's about 2 gigabytes.
Right.
And it's trained on a 308 terabyte model, right?
Yeah.
And so I can't get all that data into 2 gigabytes. What's in the 2 gigabytes are notes about all those other things.
Yep.
And so there's an argument on the pro AI side, there's an argument that it's fair use in that artwork has been displayed publicly.
Yep.
Normal human artists will view that and take notes and learn from it. Computer artist takes notes and learns from it and then creates its own thing, right? So I don't know where that lands in the law.
Right.
And so that's a question nobody in the group does either. It's a big.
Well, and that's the open question. This comic book that I created here, I've submitted, and I'm a client of our clinic, so if I have problems, I've got good representation. I've submitted specifically to kind of probe these kind of questions.
Awesome.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I think I had some other thoughts on that. Let me think about that for a second. Anybody else here? Feedback, questions? Yeah, great.
This is sort of a recurring theme for me the last couple of days.
Yeah.
Pick out a couple of parts of what you just talked about and how you would have talked about them last year and how you would talk about them next year.
Got it. Okay. So what I could have, I've sort of leaned into this in the past, and one thing that we could have talked about last year was instead of looking at, and this actually would be, I think, easy in both fair use and attribution, instead of looking at a stable diffusion engine, look at something like the Library of Congress collection of photographs as the background that we use that, and then we use that to then convert with colorization or cartoonification, if that's the right word, apps as a source of things like that. And in doing that, everything should be attributable, right? So I think 1 year ago, 10 years ago, like CC created content's been around for a long time, right? So using that and then drawing on top of it, I think would be an easy way to do it. A few years from now, I think what we'll be doing is hopefully drawing more, but also drawing more on things that sort of like blend stuff together. The question is, maybe we'll have a better understanding of how to attribute. Because I think that a big part of the I'd love to say out of Midjourney, this is where the inspiration came from, but all I can see is Midjourney, or Stable Diffusion, or DeviantArt, or whatever, right? Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I feel like I'm sitting right between the two.
Yeah.
Because I just, to comment, I'm very persuaded by that argument in that the model that you hand out is not actually a copy of anything. So if you have a copyright concern, I think that's a different issue. There's questions about how you produce it, but anyhow. And I actually think the copyright thing is a MacGuffin. Because the thing, and so I'm curious if you'll get to this with your students, it's one thing to say, oh, and I think everyone goes for copyright, and it's the wrong cudgel. Because artists have always looked at things. Now you can use these tools to create infringement, because you can do a prompt that will clearly infringe on someone's. So you can do that. So there's a subtlety there that sometimes you can use it to infringe or not. The model itself I don't think was infringing. But if you ask what's different about this compared to artists who look and do things and use that to make stuff, I think the real question is that, or to me the thing that sticks out is that it's that if you put like a person in a box and like did a Turing test for like, is this a person doing this or not, the difference is going to be that this one, the computer can do a lot more. And it can do a lot faster, and it's not the copyright. Really, you start getting into, it's an antitrust issue. It's a labor issue.
Yep.
And so I worry that the copyright is a distraction, and that actually hardline copyright stuff is not going to help artists, because eventually they're going to start saying exactly the same thing. They're going to say, hey, everyone's seen our work, so give us a little money. And then everyone's going to be like, what was your influence? Oh, we can't tell. We'll just mechanically license. So do you get into, like, is labor, antitrust, are those?
Yeah, so I don't teach it, but I think that is a thing that we've looked at. And also, I mean, one thing that I want to do with this class is also look to see, like, how are you engaging with content creators? I mean, there's the attribution piece, but also I mean, every comic book that is written, the sort of classic ones, you have somebody who does the lettering, and somebody who does the drawing, and somebody who does the filling in. So there's multiple people there, and then it's a question of like, what did people agree to, right? Will Eisner's cool because he ended up actually retaining the copyright for most of his stuff. But people that did Superman had a little bit harder time with some of that stuff, right? So we do kind of get into that, less about labor theory and antitrust, more because I don't teach in that area, but I think those are things to actually lean into. But then I also had, the thing I forgot about you is, one of the claims that's in the Northern District, in the complaint, in the Northern District of California, is they're basically saying, this is like a search engine. You're just putting words in and getting stuff back, and that's copyright infringement. And the response is, well, kind of what you're saying is, no, you're not getting things back that are already there. You're getting assemblages of ideas that are there, which is a little bit different. It's it's a colorable argument, and it's a similar thing to Microsoft's, what's it called, Copilot? So like what it is, you're doing like code completion there of sort of taking subroutines and things like that from others, and it's hard to know how you would attribute it. But it's sort of arguably transformative, but I think the argument will run long and deep. Right? Sure. And we had another question over here.
Oh, I mean, I would just say that what I think is missing from somewhat the labor piece, but it's not just the labor piece. It's that, you know, the content creators or the illustrators or the artists or the writers, they have a world, right? It's not just like their world consists of, you know, a professional association, schools, teachers.
Yep.
You know, there are people that make the, you know, the tools they use. They have families that they support and children. So I think these changes are going to have like huge ripple effects in our society. And that's just what no one is talking about is, you know, when you say like a content creator, it's not just a content creator, it's an illustrator with a job
Yep.
who supports a family. And it, you know, there's lots of connections to that. And so I'm really concerned that in several years, we're going to live in a society where the only people who can make art are the people who are independently wealthy, because everyone else can do it using these tools.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
why not?
Yeah. One thing on that, I think that's totally, and these are things I'm sort of internally struggling with. Part of my focus on access to justice is like, just create things that help people, and then we can have the conversations around like, are we also hurting people in the process by like, whether it's stealing or misappropriating or not sort of like recognizing the labor aspect of it or whatever, but like create things that through visual storytelling actually help people understand their rights. Whether it's, you know, Will Eisner's view of like, this is how to like, you know, swap out parts in your Jeep, or whether it's Haley's thing around like, this is how to understand financial distress, or it's like, this is how to fill out the name change form, and this story tells you what to do versus just plain language or something that's like the statutory text.
Yeah, I'd like your students though to think about some of the broader implications
Yeah.
of these tools being used en masse
Right.
to replace creative professionals.
Yeah, so one thing I absolutely agree, one thing that we're sort of like hemmed in by is, we have this group of things, and this is really cool, like anybody at a law school looking to build this out. We do reading groups, so it's a single credit and it's on a theme and it's for credit. It's for credit, but it's not graded. But it's in one credit, and so the ABA views that as 50 hours of contribution. I want people to spend 20 or 30 of those hours drawing
Yeah.
and then talking in class to have interesting conversations. So I'm probably gonna go less into the like Sherman Act, right? But or maybe there's a Sherman Act cartoon I would do. That'd be pretty fascinating.
There you go.
Carl and then Kim.
Yeah, I just, along some of these comments about illustrators, and it made me think of the plenary speaker's comment also about how when law students aren't learning how to write, then they miss out on developing that skill. It's a similar thing, like what skills are valuable for people to know how to do themselves. Like, I read a Ray Bradbury short story about in the future everything will be so convenient that we won't have to do anything, and then what's the meaning of our lives at that point? And like nobody knows how to do woodworking or plumbing or anymore either.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things to think about there.
It will be the WALL-E world, basically, like in these little pods. And so, by the way, we are at time. I want to keep having this conversation here, but if anybody has to go to trains, get to the bathroom, things like that, please get up, walk around. Let's keep talking, but like I think we're at time. Yeah.
Well, just riffing on the comment from before about, just as an FYI, early versions of tools that will let you create animated and/or real live action videos
Yep.
with the same speed and ease of comics are starting to hit the market now.
Yeah, that's next.
Yeah, so very shortly you'll be able to say, write me a video give me a music video starring J-Lo, so talk about problems there, but give me a music video starring J-Lo that's polka and sung in Russian, and it will produce one for you.
Right. You know what I want to do is give me a video of somebody who is going to a Virginia courthouse to appeal their driver's license revocation, and they're having to stick their cell phone in the bushes because they don't have public transportation and phones aren't allowed in the courthouse.
Right.
Right? Because that's a story that I want told, and I think if you can't draw well enough, but you can get that out and like get people to then change systems for that, that'd be great. But then we have to sort of debate kind of what's going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just a point on the labor and the sort of changes to our society, which I've definitely been thinking about a lot, and this idea of all these technologies emerging. You know, I already expect that certain entities are going to exploit creative labor. Creative labor is exploited all the time,
Yeah.
and it's only going to continue. And this is why writers are on strike right now for exactly this
Yeah.
issue. So folks
But you'll
are
get
thankfully
so much
talking about it.
exposure.
Yes, exposure, do it for the exposure. What I am so scared about right now in this room is the idea that people who are working for access to justice might miss thinking about these issues, right? And that there are folks like me who want to provide these resources. The Blob cartoon, I'm so glad that showed up. There's a free Blob database, so you can use it for any access to justice project. There's images there, and you can use it for anything that promotes access to justice. And if you're interested, look me up on Twitter, Hallie J. Pope, and I will send you the Dropbox link. It's very low tech, but
And also the Noun Project, like is
and the
phenomenal.
Noun Project, there's
Yeah,
tons of,
exactly.
so I think there are I'm very cognizant of the fact that folks working for access to justice have limited resources, and this stuff is really hard to do, and here comes this tool that makes it free and relatively easy. And so I do think you are well positioned to sort of bring these ethical questions in, because I know certain people are gonna do it and take the easy way and not care about the fact that they're exploiting people. But the people who are fighting for more just systems, I think it's really important for them to do that in just ways, and there are ways for them.
I totally agree. You have a brief comment, and then
You'll get to be your own lawyer because you'll use an app.
I think this kind of goes with how the music industry goes after, rightfully or not, you know, lyrics or tunes that seem to be lifted from others. Artists and illustrators don't seem to have that same type of protection yet. So, like you were saying, I mean, we're going to lose, you know, people who make a living doing these kinds of work.
Yeah.
You know, what's the point?
so I'm going to just end on one thing, and I'm just sort of cribbing from a variation on what David said in his talk, which is I think in life, like what we want to do and what I hope that we'll instill in our students is to create more value than you extract, right? So to somehow contribute, I think this is Larry Lassager, I forget who said this, so I'm stealing it from someone and not attributing it correctly. But like that you're actually bringing more to society than you're taking away from it. And this is a bit of the model that David was talking about in his thing. It's like, if more of your input goes into it than the output, like if more of your contribution is somehow in there, I think that that's good. And maybe your contribution is recognizing the societal problem, telling a story about it, getting involved in making changes to things, and having a conversation around whose illustration has been sort of incorporated into what you're doing here. We're a little over time. I'll stay on and talk. I hope I didn't cut anybody off here. There's a couple more pins if anybody didn't get one and wants one, and there may be some more stickers floating around as well. But please come up and talk.
Sorry, we just got a question.
Oh my gosh, there is a question from chat. Yes. Oh, good.
Could one use an AI image generator in a way that just draws from a restricted pool of images, for example, one's own photos, non-copyrighted images, etc.?
Yeah. So could if I'm talking now, can the audience hear the?
I believe so, right?
I think it's
Tobias,
so
it's
right.
on.
Yeah. So I'll just answer that. So Adobe Firefly is trying to do something like this, which is they're using something that they have a AI-like generation system that is intended to, or at least billed as drawing from things that are copyright free. And the other thing that you can do with Midjourney is there may be some noise that gets into it, is upload your own images. So if you have a claim of ownership to the actual content, you could put that up there and use that as something that's then trained. So you could say, put up a drawing that I made or a CC license thing and colorize it in the style of, you know, Steve Ditko or something like that. So you can do that, but I mean, there's still a question around. It's still not yet a fully clear legal landscape on that stuff.
Thank you.
Exactly. Was there any other questions from the chat?
That was the only question in the chat,
Thanks.
yeah.
Good.
On the happy side, I mean, the fair use question is a big question.
Yeah.
So, but if fair use comes down on that side,
Yeah.
I have seen lots of people who did not have earning opportunities and who are, generally speaking, lower income
Yeah.
individuals, develop niches in creating book covers and comic books and other things using these tools. So whether that's net positive for society or not is still an open question, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? There are new jobs also being created with these tools, and so whether that's a plus or minus, we'll have to shake out, but
And they're not just like selling, Etsy prints of things that are stitched together images of, stuff using the tile technique.
Right,
You're
no, they're
talking
doing,
about the freelance model. And freelance jobs don't come with benefits, they don't come with health insurance, they don't come with any sorts of employment protections that we can enjoy. So you have a totally fair point, but I'm
Sure.
just saying most of those jobs that you're referring to are freelance.
What happened to
Or
freelancers when
gig
clip art,
economy
came in and typography moved from being like press type to, like printed out on the Mac? I mean, when I was just out of architecture school in the mid '80s, and the Macs came out, and all of a sudden I was a graphic designer, and I was taking work from people who actually were graphic designers, and I felt a little guilty, but I mean, these things have been going on for a long time. So
Yeah, you were able to find a job though, right, as a graphic designer?
no, occasionally, yeah, freelance and.
Yeah, you had a job, yeah.
a little bit.
Freelance.
But I'm just saying freelance work, like what you're talking about, is totally legitimate, but it is a different labor model.
sure.
And that's like something we're gonna have to like reckon with, especially when we're thinking about access to justice. Because again, like freelance work is usually lower paid and there's no employment.
One thing I think is interesting, again, I'm trying to be, you're absolutely right, fair point. Again, on the happier side, one thing I am seeing is so publishing is big five, in fiction especially, there's 5 major publishers in the US, it's been a lot of consolidation. And one of the problems with big five publishing is they have major superior access to illustrators, right? That's one of the issues. And so one thing I've seen is actually smaller publishers really latch onto this. And so I think it doesn't have to be gig economy. I think that's how we're structured
No, it
currently.
absolutely doesn't.
So I think there can be creative, still positive benefits even with what you're talking about. But your point is absolutely right. I don't want to push everybody from hey, let's have everybody stop having healthcare benefits like we all stop having pensions, right? Like that happened, right? So I think you're making a good point. There is a danger there. I don't think it's a necessary conclusion, but it's a dangerous possible conclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something you can just walk into if you get distracted by the copyright MacGuffin.
Sure.
Well, I'm gonna make a comic, the copyright MacGuffin.
Copyright MacGuffin.
That's fine.
Would it be a dog?
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Take a bite out of copyright claim, right?
Take a bite out of copy.
Thank you so much, yes.
It's just such a thrill to
She would,
watch a
what you're talking about
presentation about
is that
long
I know.
definitely both are true.
Well, and then, yeah.
What time's the end?
Yeah,
Both.
let's
Yeah, let's
chat
just-
about
yeah.
this.
Marginal move around and
That's so
that's
great to
Absolutely.
meet you.
just-
I did, yes, I did, thank you so much.
Like,